I want to say, mothers, we love you. I don't know that it's ever been easy to be a mother, but certainly moms, today we celebrate you because it's tough to raise children in the uncertain times we live in. And certainly every human generation thinks, this is the most uncertain it's ever been. And then it's even more uncertain around the corner. But our culture is at war over who gets to determine truth for our kids. And every time we turn around, there's someone or something on a screen or something in a book that's trying to indoctrinate or influence or teach our kids something we may not agree with or don't want them to know about yet. And I know countless moms in our church who have been frustrated by the hidden agendas and children's cartoons, disappointed in the school system, and weary from explaining to their kids for the millionth time why they don't have a phone yet when their friends do. So moms, I want to encourage you this morning. It is tough. There are a million things to distract you and to distract your children. And so what I hope to do this morning is to encourage you from the scriptures with a story of a mother who stood up for her child, who defended her child, who protected her child. And then I want to focus all of our attention on the power of parenting. As Ms. Shannon said earlier, every one of us have a role to play in raising the kids in this church. I was raised in a church where not everybody was serving in kids ministry, but everybody valued the children in the house. And we have a church here this morning. We value our kids. And to be honest with you, sometimes children, especially in our church as it has grown, that sometimes they are noisy, but we don't complain. Sometimes it is difficult because we have to do so many extra things for all of the extra children we have. We have more babies heading into the nursery in the next 6 months than ever before, and these are blessings because the moment that stops, it may be quiet for a moment and we breathe a sigh of relief, but that's also the moment that empty nester syndrome sets in, and we as a church, we get a little bit old, a little bit tired, a little bit more or less alive. And so what I want to focus our attention on the close of this message is how we are called as a church to be a mother figure in the lives of kids who may not have the mothers at home, who may not have what you had growing up. I want to begin by reading in Exodus chapter 2. Some of you are familiar with the story. We're going to read about Moses' mother. It says, there was a man from the house of Levi and took his wife, a Levite woman. I love that on Mother's Day, we don't even know this dude's name. Appropriate. We're going to learn about Jochebed. Verse 2, the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she had saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. Now, for the context of this, there was a huge problem she was facing. Just like we live in uncertain times, they lived in uncertain times. The Israelites were growing rapidly. They were giving birth more rapidly than the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians thought, what better way to keep them at bay than to start killing off their children who were boys. And so she gave birth to her son, and she said, no, you're not getting this one. I'm going to protect him. So she hid him for 3 months, as long as she could keep him quiet. Verse 3 says, when she could hide him no longer, because every one of the mothers in here know what a 6-month-old sounds like. They know what a 12-month-old sounds like, and the screech, the crying. She took him from a basket and made of bulrushes and daubed it with a bitumen and a pitch. So much theological interest here. We don't have time for. Pitch is what Noah put inside the ark. It's a redemptive narrative. It's something God used to redeem. It's something that protected. It kept the water out. We don't have time for that story right now. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. None of us would think to place a child in the river. If any one of you were to take your child and even put them in a flotation device and set them in the Elizabeth River, immediately people would call CPS. What's wrong with you? We don't have crocodiles in this river most of the time. She had to do something extreme because of the extreme time she was living in. I want you to put yourself in her place and imagine every night when you lay down thinking about that child in the bulrushes. Hoping certainly that an animal doesn't find it, but more importantly that the Egyptian soldiers don't find it and murder it like every other boy of his age. Moses gets a bad rap. He turns 40. He murders an Egyptian for persecuting a Hebrew. What most people forget is Moses had no peers his age, not one. He did not grow up with another teenage friend, brother, cousin. He was the only boy his age. And he survived because of what his mother did for him. So when it comes to parenting, we don't get to control the circumstances in which we parent, but we do get to choose how we respond to them. Now listen, she would have never chosen to give birth to a boy at this moment in history where a boy's life would be in danger, where every other boy would be thrown into the river, chopped up, and awfully murdered and executed. But she did get to respond how she responded. She did get to choose how she would respond. She, like every other mother, would have preferred less drama and less danger. And today, you as mothers, we as parents face many decisions, distractions, and even dangers for our children. And we can't control them. Look, I'd love to go back pre-iPhone. I think we all would. If you have a child in the room, you would prefer there not to be iPhones, but they're here. I would prefer to raise my son in a world where porn is less accessible, but it's here. And so I can't control what's here, but I can control how we respond and how we do our best to protect him from it and from himself. How we respond reveals the true test, the true power, the true strength of our character. So notice what happens next in verse 4. And his sister stood at a distance. Now the sister's life was not in danger. So of course, she's not just leaving him in the river. She says, you're going to go watch your little brother. And she was old enough to understand why this mattered, why she needed to protect him, and why she needed to stay at a distance where people wouldn't put together that she was watching a baby in the bulrushes. She stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. What a helpless scenario to find yourself in as a big sister. Verse 5. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. I love this. Don't miss this. It's a beautiful story of how God orchestrated the princess of Egypt to be taking a bath in the river. And notice, it says the young women were walking out first. When they would bathe, there were still crocodiles. So what the princess had was she had maid servants around her. And you know what their job was? To get eaten first. That was their job. They would go in, they would form a circle, she would go in between them, she would bathe. Imagine that's your job. And so they're poking around the riverbank. They know how to poke and prod, get these crocodiles moving, and they discover this baby. She saw the basket among the reeds. She sent her servant woman, she took it. In verse 6, when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. She knew what this was. They're doing their best to protect this child, but she falls in love. Now, any other Egyptian woman falling in love with this baby doesn't matter, but this Egyptian woman, she's related to Pharaoh. Verse 7, I love the audacity, the leadership, the boldness of Moses' sister. His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go call a nurse for him? Shall I get a Hebrew woman to nurse this child for you? I've put together that you love this baby already, and if he's going to survive, he needs to be nursed. Do you want me to go fetch you one? I know just the lady. I have quite the idea. We never know how God will use our kids to speak truth. You know, it's funny, sometimes we get old and we get a little bit more mature, and as a result, we don't say things that people might find inappropriate, but our kids, from time to time, will put us on the spot. Our kids will tell people we're going to church when we didn't know that, we didn't want them to know we were going to church. Our kids will talk about Jesus to our neighbors when we're a little afraid to talk about Jesus to our neighbors. Our kids will tell everybody that we believe the Bible when maybe that wouldn't be what we would start with, because we've raised them to tell the truth. And from time to time, we're a little less bold. God had prepared Jochebed to raise a daughter who would speak truth at just the right moment. Now, she was raising her daughter well. She raised her with wisdom, enough wisdom to intercede and even to offer a solution. I'm sure she was proud of her daughter, because notice what happens next, verse 8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called, you guessed it, the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me. So Moses gets to go back home and be nursed by his mother, but now there's a sign on the door that says, this child is protected by the order of Pharaoh. Don't you say nothing to this Hebrew family, because this child is under the protection of Pharaoh himself. Notice this, and I will give you wages. Not only is she going to raise Moses, she's going to get paid to raise Moses. What a story only God could put together. So the woman took her child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Now that's tough, and I'm going to tell you about that. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. Now, there's a lot of debate about how long she nursed him. Some say 2 to 3, some as old as 4 and 5 years of age was the common practice. But what all scholars agree is that Hebrew women, for generations, when they would nurse their child, they would whisper truths about Jehovah in their ear. They would tell them about their God who loved them and saved them and created them and had a plan for them and a purpose. Even in slavery, they would tell their kids about God who loved them and had a plan for Abraham. And Isaac was his firstborn. And they would share the story. So I don't know how long she got to hold her baby. But I know, because of what happened in Moses' life, that she infected him. She influenced him. She gave him enough truth to know that all the trappings of Pharaoh's house, all the education that he was put through, all the things that were sent his way, the money, the sex, the opportunities that he would have, there was a God worth serving that meant more than just doing what he wanted. So I'll say it this way. We can't protect our kids from everything, but we can prepare them for anything. You know, I would love to create a bubble where nothing bad ever happens to my Judah. But that doesn't happen here on earth. All I can do is do my best to prepare him for anything that does befall him. Physical ailment, spiritual issues, emotional damage, broken relationships, being bullied or even being tempted to be a bully. The world our children face is something we can't change, but we can prepare them for it. I love how God twists the plot and conceives of a mother getting paid to nurse her boy, to raise him, and to influence him before he would face the temptations that lie ahead. Mothers, hear this. God honors your effort to guide these little hearts. John Wesley said it this way, I learned more about Christianity from my mother than from all the theologians in England. How many of us today know what we know of the Lord, know what we know of faith and prayer because of a mother that taught us? Now, I want to turn a corner here. Though I want to celebrate Jochebed and every mother in the room, I want you to understand that in the New Testament church, we are given a picture of motherhood influencing and infecting even the church itself. What I mean by that is, throughout the scriptures, God is referenced as our Father, Jesus the Son, and then the church is called the bride of Christ. And I'm not adding the church as the fourth member of the Trinity. This is more practical than theological, what I'm about to say. But most of us, if we were gifted to be raised in a good church, we know the love and care and discipline and even punishment that came through a good church and how similar it is to a good mother. When I was a child, I was raised by a single mom. Most of you know my mother. She attends our church. She serves. She's very involved. When I was little, my mom had to work a lot of hours, and so she didn't always get the time with me that she would have liked. She put me in the preschool, the daycare at our local church, and when I would come home, I would know that I got in trouble, and my mom would ask me, what did you do today? And I would say, oh, nothing. And then she would rehearse for me line for line what I got into trouble for. And I would say, Mommy, how did you know? And she would always say, the birds told me. For 3 years of my life, I would look up before I did anything. See, which one of you has been flying over to my mom's work? As I got older, I learned that every lady who worked in the preschool also attended our church. And so they would be at Wednesday night Bible study telling my mom all the things that I did, because they weren't just there to collect a paycheck. They were there to help raise and nurture and admonish and discipline and come alongside a single mother and help her mother her little boy who didn't have a daddy, and they took it seriously. And as I got older, it wasn't just the ladies in our church. There were men and women who loved me and mentored me. And though I wasn't biologically related to them, the church as a whole knew of me, cared for me. Many of my babysitters, my after-school care providers, my rides to school and from school were people in our church. And so no matter where I went, no matter who I was hanging out with, no matter what car I was in, they were listening to BBN. Oh no, if you don't know what BBN is, I don't know that you're a Christian. It's the Bible Broadcasting Network. They do not play anything with drums, guitars, or anything modern. It is very old-fashioned. I knew every song. My mom was a single mom, and she couldn't be everywhere all the time, but her network of birds and mothers seemed to be everywhere in my life. Cyprian of Carthage, one of the early church fathers, said it this way: no one can have God for his father who has not the church for his mother. Throughout the scriptures, we are told of the love and the holiness of God our Father. Paul in Galatians 4 said that he was in birth pains for disciples. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. Paul referenced himself as a nursing mother to his disciples. Just as nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you in 1 Thessalonians 2. It wasn't that Paul was confused about his gender. He just understood that as a church, we are called to do more than just hang out together. We're called to love one another, encourage one another, support one another. And often, whether we're a man or a woman in the church, this spreads in the community like the love of a mother who is caring for her children. Paul references in 1 Corinthians 3, he says, I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. Over and over, we see the church referenced as a mother figure in our lives. Now, I want to say something that maybe I should have said earlier in the message. I know that not every woman here, when they come to Mother's Day, is excited because you've had a traumatic relationship with your mother. Maybe you didn't know your mom. Maybe you thought by now you would be a mother. Just as many of the men in the room are carrying father wounds with them, many of us from time to time have mother wounds. And some of you this morning, it's deeper than biological. You didn't have a good, healthy church relationship. You were hurt by your mother church growing up. There were no birds talking to your mother. There was only gossip and envy and jealousy and infighting. And so I come before you to say this morning, the church I grew up in was not perfect, but it was good. It was healthy, and it was beautiful. And our church that you've gathered in this morning, our church is not perfect either, but we're going to do our best to be a healthy church for the little ones running around here. I want you to see the power of a church full of mothers and fathers on mission. And what I want to do as I close is just tell you the benefit that I've had raising a 3-year-old who this morning did everything he could not to go into class, everything he could not to come to church, everything he could because he's 3. And everyone told me 3 was terrible, but he was so good when he was 2. I was like, if this is terrible too, 3 is going to be a breeze. I take it all back. He's a 3-nager, as Miss Tanya calls it, and he's full of spite and anger. But as she always does this morning, a kicking, screaming Judah, Miss Tanya, consoled him, couldn't get him to agree that he wanted juice, so she started drinking juice in front of him. I want some of that. And she cut off the little broken loop in his head, and he began helping with the little ones. And right now, my boy is in the nursery. I mentioned to you at First Wednesday a couple of weeks ago that our church, the kids in the nursery, they follow this curriculum that every child kind of has the same story. Now listen, the older kids are going to get a very different version than the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds, but the 2 and 3-year-olds got a skit a few weeks ago. And in this skit, they built a cave with a sheet. And someone had to be Jesus, someone had to be Lazarus. All the other kids were learning the whole story. All these kids were learning was like the basics, like Lazarus is dead in the cave. Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth. And guess who they picked to be Jesus? Of course, Judah gets to be Jesus because he's the pastor's son and he can do no wrong, apparently. But he got to say, his friend went in there, he got to say, Lazarus, come forth. Just a silly little skit. But those nursery team workers put together for him. It's been like 8 or 9 weeks since that lesson, and every time there's a blanket or a sheet, he says, let's make a cave. Let's tell Lazarus to come out. And I always say, how about you be Lazarus? I don't want to get in the cave. You come out. No, Daddy, I'm Jesus. You. And while it's silly, and it's just the bare bones of that story, my son is understanding one of the first miracles, the most important miracles of Jesus' ministry, raising someone from the dead. That's why they began arresting. They were like, we got to kill him now because he's bringing people back from the dead. They're all going to follow him. My boy knows the truth from the Bible at 3 years old because some ladies threw a sheet on a table and put together a skit their little heart and mind could wrap its head around. Miss Shannon lives in our neighborhood, and we ride bikes, and every time we ride bikes, now that he knows where she lives, he says, we need to stop and say hello to Miss Shannon. I need to talk to Miss Shannon. I want to say hello to Miss Shannon. Sometimes I say, Miss Shannon might not want to see you. You've been mean today. But he wants to see Miss Shannon. Miss Jenny comes up here from time to time, and she helps clean the church. And when she comes up here, sometimes she comes on Tuesdays. Sometimes Tuesday is the day that Judah comes in when no one's here, and he plays on the drums. Sure, don't tell your kids he does that, but he does that. And she always sees him, and when she sees him, she stops everything she's doing. She's got to go find him a gift. And if she ain't got a gift, she's going to reach in her pocket and pull out $1 or something to give to him. And so Judah, he's always looking for Miss Jenny because he knows she's got something for me. And if your kids have ever been over Terry and Jenny's house, they're going to come home with 4,000 calories of candy in their system because they've got a good candy stash. He looks forward to seeing Miss Michelle in the nursery. This morning, he found out Lexi, one of our teenage girls, was going to be in the nursery. And for a moment, he was like, no, I still don't want to go. But you could tell he was like, but I do like Lexi. He loves Bailey. He loves all these ladies and teenage girls that love on him and influence him for Jesus. So church, what I want you to see is that we love our mothers and we celebrate our mothers, but it's not just their burden to bear. It's ours. My Judah will listen to some of you in ways that he no longer listens to me and mommy because he still likes you. You didn't punish him this morning. And so you've got a level of influence, a layer of influence. You've got a language that he knows. This is why Pastor Kevin, Pastor Brian, and myself are so serious and even tough about what we as a church do and don't do. who we do and don't allow to serve with our children, who we enable and install as leaders at our church. Because hear me, not just anybody gets to lead our children, not just anybody gets to influence the next generation, not just anybody with a pulse gets to determine what truth looks like for the next generation around here. And when a church is healthy, it's beautiful, but when dysfunction sets in, the kids realize it. The teenagers see through it. They see through the hypocrisy. And so, church, I want you to hear me say this. Parenting is not just something for the nursery to do or the kids ministry team. Parenting is not just for the mothers and the fathers. It's something we're all called to pass on our faith to the next generation. And so this is something we take absolutely seriously around here. This is why Pastor Mark, Pastor Kevin, and Pastor Brian, we deal with sin. I know that's a 3-letter word that a lot of churches don't want to use anymore, but we deal with sin. Because when sin creeps in and isn't dealt with, isn't repented of, we don't embarrass people. We don't use guilt to manipulate people, but we absolutely will hold people accountable. Whether it's a leader, an attender, a staff member, or a pastor. Because our kids need to see that we don't just read this book when it's convenient and put it away when it's inconvenient. We believe God's word. We believe the gospel. We believe that Jesus didn't just save us to make us feel better. He saved us to change us. And if we aren't willing to change, it reveals a heart condition that is wrong. Stubborn, hard hearts are to be dealt with. So, church, I don't want to just celebrate the mothers. I want to remind you of our responsibility to do more than thank them and clap for them on a Sunday, but to be there for them. On an average weekend now, we're having more than 100 little hearts come through these doors, little ones who attend our church, who learn the lesson. And it's all a waste if they learn about a Jesus who changes people, but they see a bunch of adults who refuse to change. So could I preach for 1 minute and close? The best thing you can do for your children, the best thing I can do for my son, the best thing we can do for our little ones is live out the gospel. Admit when we fail. Push hypocrisy as far away as we can. Be transparent, open. Make confession and repentance regular habits of our lives, not hiding sin or denying that we're wrong. Because as much as I love what my son is being taught, what I love even more is I'm never afraid to stop by Miss Shannon's house. I'm never afraid of what Miss Jenny might tell him. I'm never afraid of him seeing Miss Tanya and she's not got her act together. These are ladies, these are people in our church who live it well. They're not perfect, but they honor Jesus in how they live. Church, could I plant a stick in the sand? We will not just teach our kids about Jesus. They will see his footprints, his handprints, his influence in our lives and how we live, how we forgive, how we love, how we serve, how we respond when we are wronged. Oh, that we would be a church where our children know those people. They love Jesus, they live it, they believe it.